Here we are, once again. I'm glad to be here this week. How many of you were here last week? Awesome. How fantastic was it? Okay, so the bar's high. All right, welcome to the Tabula Poetica reading series. This fall we've got at least 3 visiting poets, possibly 4, plus the MFA reading. And so if you don't have that MFA reading on your calendar for December, what's the date on that? It's the December Tuesday of finals week, and our own MFA students will be reading then. You can find out all the details about the whole series on our website, which is www.chapman.edu/poetry. So everything's up there. Please take out your cell phone and tweet that you're at Tabula Poetica having a great time. Or take a quick photo of the audience and put that on Instagram. And then, of course, silence your phone for the rest of the evening. Most of the support for the visiting poets and also for the International Journal Tab, which copies are over here of the last print issue with the food, so there's food and free copies of Tab over there. Most of the funding comes from the English department. I especially want to thank our department chair, Joanna Levin, our administrative assistants, Kristen Laxo, and especially David Krausman, who is an alum of the MFA program, and our MFA graduate assistants, Meg Boyles, Matt Goldman, and Mariam Saeed, all 3 of whom are actually here, so give them a big round of applause. I also want to acknowledge Leatherby Libraries. You're here in the Center for American War Letters right now, and they're very generous about allowing cultural events to happen in this space. If you haven't looked around, CAWL, C-A-W-L, we have an amazing collection of war letters that span from the Civil War to the present day. In addition, Poets and Writers continues to support the series, and they have a special program for California events, and we participate in that. So today we welcome Sarah Ann Winn. She traveled across the country to join our community for the day. So she's from the East Coast, and she's doing a little West Coast book tour, and we're the first stop, right? After 4 beaches yesterday. Sarah Ann Winn is the author of 2 chapbooks and the full-length collection Almanac, which I think some of you have, and it looks like this. And she brought copies that we can hand sell as well. So if you don't have the book and you hear some poems you like, definitely invest in poetry this evening. This book won the Barrow Street Book Prize. The instigating subject matter of this poet's work is a little bit tough to pin down. You think you know what you've got, and then it becomes something else. She draws from her own life and memories, but also from science, visual art, news stories, historical moments, and even Julia Child's kitchen at the Smithsonian. Her range is quirky, and her attentiveness to the objects and structures that surround us glistens like the spark in an eye. In an interview with Midwestern Gothic, Sarah talked about the writing process. She said, "I don't know if you've seen stones which an artist has polished until a landscape emerges. I asked the craftsperson who was selling them at a local fair how she knew when to stop polishing. She laughed and said when the birds start to vanish, that's how she knew. She'd polish until she saw the birds and stop before too many faded back into the rock. I am still trying to learn how to stop before the birds vanish." I think she's actually learned how to stop before the birds vanish. There are plenty of birds, metaphorically speaking, in her poems. Some of her polished stones are paragraphs. Others are found poems. Several poems use the constraints of an instruction list to surprise us, as she says in the poem To Preserve November, with a glimmering replica. Some riff off familiar stories. In Glinda Leaves Oz, the Good Witch makes up a map as she goes and survives the real world with a death wish and a dream. Some transform formulas into poetic form, searing the seam between familiarity and disorientation. One is a lunar chart, and I think she said she'd be reading that this evening. Another is a set of classified ads. A poem may be an appendix listing figures we are asked to imagine having seen. You think you know what you're getting, and then you realize it's something else altogether, and you are someone else as a reader, too. Please welcome Sarah Ann Winn.
Oh my goodness. Sorry, I'm actually really nervous all of a sudden. Like, how do you live up to a intro like that? It's just such a generous thing to have something read about you before you're dead. So thank you for this opportunity. I mean, I'm glad not to be witnessing it after I'm dead. So I thought I'm going to read kind of a range because we talked about a number of things in the lecture that I thought maybe I would read things that I haven't read in the past. You are my first West Coast stop, but some of these poems I've been reading for 4 years because some of them are from my first chapbook, Portage. So some are old favorites and some I haven't read in ever. So we'll see how it goes. But I actually thought I'd start with How to Haunt and a November-y sort of poem. Or not November, October-y sort of poem. Before I forget, thank you so much, Dr. Chapman and everyone here for being here, and those of you that supported my coming to Chapman. I'm so grateful, and especially those professors who are urging you to be here via a grade. So anyway, thank you. How to Haunt. Start by waiting with the wheat penny under the rug, or try to catch a ride from the wildflowered berm on warm summer nights. Outdoors is easy. Your best bet is joining the mother and child on a semi-regular basis at the old stone bridge. Wait with them to step directly into the headlights of slow-moving cars. Hold hands. It makes things easier, even when your fingers slip through. Drift the crosswalk current. Flicker the hotel vacancy sign in Morse code. You wouldn't want to be mistaken for the wind. You wouldn't want to mimic the air conditioner vents click on and off for all of eternity. Some will ask, what happens if you're seen? What happens if you're not seen? What happens next? Questions sound the floorboards underfoot. What kind of world is it that doesn't allow for candles to be domiciles, for gardens to remember their tender, their flowers facing away from the sun, persistent iris in the face of so many daffodils, persistent green leaf when the rest have gone cold? So a lot of these poems don't look like poems. So I'm going to just say that from the start. I'm going to say poems covers the range of hybridity, covers the flash fiction which appears in here. But I think the next one I'm going to read really probably looks the least like a poem in here, Notes from an In-House Field Survey, which looks more like notes. So this poem is a little odd in format. Notes from In-House Field Survey. Elders may be present singly or in pairs, always accompanied by a child to study the lay of the land in secret. Recrumpled paper to reshape waves. Calculated the number of pedal pushes past the distant shore, graphed the lily pads, marked points from the bottom of the low hill to the screen door, then calculated the increase of stories in relation to time. Furtive ethnographer, diffident geographer, see conclusions drawn with tears and pencils, eraser crumbs scattered like maple buds over her desktop. Return to update results, to report findings, disappeared weather vanes, barometers and residents gone missing, how the shrinking numbers affect the dwindling demographic, how the drive-in theater has closed down and she never got to go. After the lake has been raised and lowered 20 times since, she is always presenting the worn dictionary, which is to say, I want to understand you, which is to say, I do not understand. So I read somewhere, and I can't even remember the source, but I do remember who said it, the initial quote. Elizabeth Bishop was talking of Robert Lowell when she said he told her that reading, or what you say in between reading the poems, was the most important part, and it struck this fear inside my heart because I never plan that. I always have this. I never have the other part. So that's on my mind right now. So I'm just going to read one that is an old favorite for me. I consider whether shipping your memory home would be too costly. I take your memory out to the garage to weigh it. The scale for this is ageless, brings to mind counters and bulk foods. Its shadow has stood for years, swaying its red needle, uncertainly bouncing when jostled. A hidden spring reveals a drawer underneath, a set of weights in various shapes. One, a net of light on water cast in lead. Another, a set of miniature music box gears, each the weight of a different song, all in bronze. Sawtoothed, as if meant for toy lumber mills. I place your memory on the cradle, light as light, which also has weight and substance, matter. I add 20 snowflakes, winter preserves. I tap the meter, which trembles. Add lemon from a cold teacup. Hum as much as I can remember from when the roll is called up yonder. Finally, I open your last letter, unbend the handwriting so each word straightens into a binary barcode of blue. Dole out these sticks to the tray. If it balances, you'll go. So a lot of these poems are really from grandparent land, from my grandparents raising me, and that one was about my grandfather, whose handwriting as a trained electrical engineer was so precise it looked like a computer font before there were computer fonts. It was beautiful. And I have some of his old letters, so it wasn't a very long stretch for me to think it wouldn't take much to straighten these out into little bars of equal lengths. It was so beautiful. If you've never seen electrical engineer handwriting, Google it. Ooh, before you do, it is such a joy seeing all of you, those of you that are holding my books. Can I do the very Instagram thing and take a picture of you holding my books? I can't even tell you, like, my little heart is pitter-patting. And along with it, the mic, because apparently I just banged on it. So let me get this into state. And please hold up, I'll take two. Hold up your books on this side, over here. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. And now this side. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Yay. Oh my gosh. It's so exciting. This is the work of my heart. So many of, I will. I totally will. I've been tagging them in a kind of annoying way because I accidentally went to the Filling Station restaurant, which is an Elizabeth Bishop poem, and I realized in the middle of my eggs, I'm in the filling station thinking about the filling station. I got all excited. So I think I did over-tag them a little bit on Instagram because I was excited. Can't help myself. So I've written a number of apple poems, so I think I'll read a couple of those apple-y poems since we're in fall, and I'll start with Baldwin apples. In October, their vinegar drew bees, or decay's sweetening drew bees. We brought bushel baskets and sorted, some for the compost, the gently bruised for pies, the best, those half gone with pocked perfect skin, still a little green for canning and apple butter. The Baldwins lured me to the kitchen counter, the turn and scraping colander mill when the cooked apples were poured in, the splashed juice hot and delicious, space made by adding cooked apples carefully. She tipped the ancient Dutch oven and my idea of plenty poured down. Did you and she? I asked. Hush, she answered. I didn't dare move or some would go to waste. Save some for later, she said. Now we restock the canned goods cupboard. No beauty goes to waste here. Fill the shelf. Put up for lean winter, the sweet of slow-gathering afternoon, the long, fragrant bake, the whole house cooked up and browned with cinnamon. In winter, the sound of that seal breaking snaps me back to sorting apples in the sun, their scent rolled from Atalanta's fingers, the breath of Eve before she bit. So I can't avoid apples. I really am one of my friends jokingly called me the apple poet because she also likes apples, and so we kind of have that joke between us. So I use it to write about my family a lot because we had apples in our neighborhood. So the next one I'm going to read is more about my sister, Brayburn Apple. In the end, she was little more than a bundle of worn stakes left in the orchard. Still, her heart worked to keep the secret star of seeds inside shining. The day we saw the deer, we shared a 2 fist-sized apple. No matter how much I try to hear in my sister's voice exactly what she said, only the knobby shape of the apple is clear. I don't remember whether she said anything at all as they bounded away, or if she only laughed and ate the core. The stubborn apple blocks my way into the past, sour, oversized, and imperfect, too hard, lip-bruising. She might not have laughed, but as she was always laughing, it's likely. So I almost never read that one, so you guys are getting some new reading feelings. And I'll go with the crab apples next because we're in the apple moment. As a PS, the apple, the double apple, is a real moment. We did share an apple that was gigantic, but what she said, I have no idea. Well, I was working with my editor who asked me about the facts in this book, and this was another occasion where I don't remember. This is a book of poems. This is not an assembly of facts. So that was another awkward explanation that I'm not quoting anything. I'm just remembering what I remember. This wasn't an interview. Crab apples. Almost to make up in plenty for their size and sour, the little green apples grow tight clustered blossoms. They come to me in dreams. Pick one, I'm told. Grown angry and prolific, the faces from the boughs scrunch at my sour apple audacity. I lift my hand and see the cougar bounding down, beatific. I'm twice glad to have swerved and laughed, seeing and missing. So, these are new feelings. It's really interesting to read some of these poems because the occurrences were older, and I think the longer you get away from something, you think that memories will fade, but in weird ways they kind of emerge like those birds at weird moments, and that one is such a strong memory. So someone asked about the night poems and the driving poems that are in this book. My husband and I were a long-distance relationship for a long time. So like 8 years, I drove up and down I-95 on the East Coast for 3 hours after work every Friday night and then back again Sunday. So I had a lot of time to think about poems and memories and all those things. So there's a good chunk of this book that is traveling poems. And I'm going to start with a real figure, Our Lady of the Highways, which is a real statue on the big route on the East Coast of America, or the US, and it goes up and down quite a bit of the East Coast. But there's a real statue that's 12 feet tall called Our Lady of the Highways, and I would always see her and wonder, why is this statue out in the middle of nowhere on the other side of the bridge? There's no real label for it. So I had to do some research, and this is a real thing. Our Lady of the Highways. Find, if you can, the brightest stars, her right shoulder, the toe of her sandaled left foot, one for each of her hips. Her halo has gone out. Stars flicker on and off from her lifted wrist, her right hand raised, index finger linking with thumb, blessing the shining northbound lane. How exhausting to be collimated, intended for eternity. She does not disperse. I wish on slow nights she could extend her arm, hitch a ride north to the Waffle House, where syrup flows for 24 hours without stopping. Give her a smaller miracle, lacking loaves and fishes, lacking a wedding without wine. Let her heal the pothole just before the bridge. She's stranded in a field on the hill, waiting for the moon to make the cars into parallel arcs, star paths writing a silver-scratched record, a turntable made out of the earth, and she's at the center, unturning, unwavering. So I've got a bunch of those very drivey type poems with actual landmarks in them. And I did read Turnpike Elegy on the podcast, which was a fabulous, fabulous interview, and I'm so grateful that they interviewed me. So I hope you guys get a chance to listen to that sometime soon. Thank you for that. But I'm going to share it with you because I just think it's one of those memories that sticks with me. Turnpike Elegy. Down the white mountains, headlights flash lightning fog on the back roads. I dreamed as I drove that I picked up my sister from a rest stop somewhere in northern New Jersey, and she made me let her out of the car when we got to Delaware. I had 3 hours to ask her anything, to find the moon in the clouds of her hair, to laugh as she denied smoking, flicking embers out the window. She asked me why I couldn't keep my eyes on the road, why I had to scan the fields for deer, the rocks for falls, why I drove an hour out of my way to skirt the city. What had I done with her Garfield comics? Whatever happened to her precious things, none of which I could name? I only had the one question and couldn't voice it in the end. Smoke in my eyes, pollution in the air, and anyway, I was alone. So I'm going to go ahead and read the lunar chart lost year, but I wanted to show it to you so that those of you who don't have the book can see on the page that it doesn't look poemy. It is sectioned out as a lunar chart would be with the phases of the moon as the guidance for this. And so the images within each segment of the moon, each phase of the moon, are meant to be memories with the moon. Lunar chart lost year. First quarter. You take the incomplete necklace and wear it every day, and so does she. What's yours is yours, and what's mine is mine. Fair. Waxing crescent. A moth clings to the ceiling. Only one side is visible, but the other is the same. French manicure. You examine the thumb for flaws and find none. The night is sweet and overripe. Someone has pressed their nail in it. New, as in, this is new, said in a tone that makes it clear the speaker doesn't like the object. Something essential is gone. Cinders in the fireplace from a log which refused at first to flame. The inside of eyelids. A child says carelessly, or worse, in a heartbroken tone, I dropped it. Waning crescent. The cecropia fluttered its wings and off-skied. Nail clippings. Someone dog-eared the pages of the book too firmly. Imprint, crimped. Third quarter. Sometimes it's a divided heart, sometimes a broken coin, a torn letter. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. Fair. Waning gibbous. Dog bowl on the slanted floor. The siren moving into the distance. The aching feet, the nearby chair. Full. The coin before it's dropped into the slot. The train has hit another deer. The frog produces the golden ball. Your stomach drops away, endless, dark. The magician has palmed the quarter. He pulls it from your ear. Nobody is surprised. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine. Waxing gibbous. It's not just the leaves, the slant of branch in the white lilac bush. Press here to reboot. Enough is as good as a feast. So the hybridity I really got into because I was trying to say things that I considered sentimental or cliches in a new way. And stripping away all those extras helped me find a new way to say them. So many people have written about the moon, and I got to thinking after a lunar chart, what could I write that would be even different than that? Because who hasn't written about the moon? Every single person alive has marveled at the beauty of the moon. So I thought, well, what if the moon was something that we had that was small and we treasured it, and it had a possibility of going away, which I know that one young adult novel now has the moon disappearing, but I wrote this before that novel. Anyway, this one considers it in hopefully a new way. Nocturne. Our little one runs around the sky without any thought of finding a friend. Typical of only children, she does not always play well with others. We've thought of having a second, but the time never seemed right. And also, who would want another, having already our bright girl? We enroll her in the best school. For her afternoons, piano and ballet. Our house is full of pirouettes and inside-out tights curled like spent flower blossoms left on the stairs. She speaks all the languages of the earth. She knows how to roll her R's. She knows every constellation. She thinks she might one day grow up to be a painter. We give her lakes full of rippling shadows and light and all the walls she can cover. She begs us for a kitten. We give her a kitten. She calls me mother, and when I turn out the light, she buries her head in my neck. Her sleeplessness worries us. We've asked for tests to cover a range of childhood ailments. We could not bear to lose her. I mean, how could we do without the moon? I just don't even know. What would we write about? So someone observed that I do put a lot of nature in my book, and the almanac, most of the nature is taken from the Portage Lakes area of Akron, Ohio. That's where I grew up. So all the animals in that ecosystem I considered free game, literally. I just plucked them out of my memories and plopped them on the page, scientific or not. So I do include some factual things, but not many. Blue heron. Sometimes she started on the northern edge and worked her way south along the shoreline. Sometimes she flew to the center point from different vantages, over and over, drawing an invisible and immense asterisk in the air. Always she fretted. The southern part, where the reeds grew thicker, looked like it might be drying out. The muskrats had burrowed into the western shore just a little to one side of the aging dock, which had always been there. To the north, the ducks were distraught. A duckling had gone missing in the night. Snappers, probably, the crane would mourn. So that crane, I couldn't stop thinking about that crane. And that poem came and went while I was working on a longer one that was way more difficult to write, kind of about how we grieve, like how people in general grieve, but also in particular how my family grieved when my sister passed away. So I wrote Field Identification, starting off as field guide. It once was a super short poem. For a while it was a prose poem. I tried to write this poem, but finally it arrived in this long for me format, and I think that it says the things I was trying to say. Field identification. When there was nothing left to say, we talked about birds, pointed out the finches' little black caps, the way their clever claws wrap the seeds so they can pry husk from meat with their beaks. Head tilt, crack, one eye kept on us. At the kitchen table, we looked up the ones who fluttered round our feeder. From our cornflake field, in hedges of dishes, we were camouflaged by cereal boxes in a butter dish bird blind. Besides nuthatches and chickadees, we identified cardinals and blue jays even in silhouette. Their peaked heads, their bully swoop to knock away smaller birds, sparrows and wrens. Our table grew still so quickly, we hadn't yet learned to talk about birds. Our hands still shook, putting back the last plate, newly silent. The words wouldn't come for what's next. The silence stretched out its long neck, designed for deep spearing, always ready to stand in the water, to be patient, calm, to try together to find the blue crane, sketched in long gray lines, deliberate Stacies on our dock or across the lake, water doubled, angled through lilies. Come winter, the ducks shivered around the small open patch of ice near the spillway. The always present birds. We have the birds always. Like them, we forgot for a while how to go to warmer places. We keep the birdhouse full, regularly check the feeder, its lid raised and lowered, manual grain elevator. We think about the birds as instructed. Someone has told us to avoid millet. Who knew how popular peanuts would be? We consider the sparrows. We weigh thistle and sunflower. We try to count the goldfinches when they gather and spat. More than 10, maybe many more, maybe 50 flying in and out of the barberry hedge to fight. I want to multiply my hours this way, round up the numbers flown into branches only half seen, count the minutes moving too quickly twice, sit at the kitchen table, or stand endlessly drying dishes, search the gray sky for signs of peregrination, stay by the feeder, filled over and over, keep hunger at bay. So this was nearing the end of writing this book that some of these poems started taking their final forms. And so the poemy ones became more poem-looking. The ones that were not became more hybrid-looking. Homing out of the entire book is the one that changed shape the most. This one was, I would say, sonnet length, rhymed. It was not what it is here. So I changed quite a bit with this one. It was unusual. P.S. As a warning, I am going to ask if there are any questions. So if you already are like that kind that you need a minute of warning to think about these things, in a couple poems I'm going to ask for questions. So, all right, homing. I shouldn't laugh. This is a serious poem. Homing. White, more shocking than camera flash, sparks against sky like sun-stricken lakes. Unlikely doves would roost here, taking a break from rising at weddings. Black rooftop, white rhythm. Nearby, a hedge obscures the dovecote from roadside view. Beside the funeral home, on power lines, where traffic pauses at the light, the living haunt the dead. She thinks of her late mother's step, slippers flopping up the stairs. If she is sleeping, I will wake her. Always she stopped where the stairs flatten into a mesa beside the door. The sleeper waits to say goodnight. The doves rise past like dreams. When she drives by, their wings call soft her mother's name. Yeah, that one was a difficult one to write because it was a driving poem, but it wasn't a driving poem. That one was way more rooted in my Akron roots than it was ever on the eastern seaboard. So I'll read a couple more. One I think I'll do that is going to be way more hybrid-y, audio tour. So if you want to follow along at home, you're welcome to do so, audio tour. And then one more. Begin already in progress. Drive down the highway past the clock tower. This is the way I waved when we passed the old Firestone building. The owls stood in the window of the old Portage Inn as a signal or a code. I noticed every week and wondered why they were meant to, or what they were meant to ward away, especially in winter, when the crowds came to watch ice golf. The owls and the innkeepers were arrested at last, and I miss the owls, miss them even now. The sign crossing the bridge showed a mother duck with her head cut off, blithely, or was it bravely, leading 3 little ones across. The island grew up from the lake the year they dredged, and I felt someone else I loved had died. My best friend lived just across the way, just around the point, though you could not see her house from my room. Her house, hidden even from a boat near the shore. Here are the woods we stumbled through at night. Here's the church bell. Open the doors, see all the missing people. Note how small this room is, how the beds twin and face the wrong way, how the past jigsaws in, how the leaves cast the shadow of an old woman in a rocker, how the headlights chase across the ceiling. See the chestnut mare's eyes in the pine wall, and just below it, the roans. So that one is actually entirely true, the whole shebang, down to the owls, which got the couple arrested that were selling drugs. So on that cheerful note, I will end with a slightly happier one. Floats, that really is the filling station answer as far in my mind. Like if I could talk to Elizabeth Bishop, I would say, what do you think of floats? Do you see filling station in it at all? I'd be all excited if she said yes. I'm not sure she would talk to me. Floats. July 4th, baseball's on the radio. A steady hum from the garage outlasts the locusts for an inning. Tonight the fireworks will splay and fall over the lake, but now in the lull after picnic, a little work sweetens the languor. A hymn of mending to be done, perpetual hum in work clothes, at work benches, hum of AM radio, hum of a job well done, grinding, a machine file, a drill, an electric saw job, a thirst for work ground down waterless, a quenchable need to shape for use, thirst to be finished, to restart, to righten, salt of drive, of worn hammers ready to drive home, the well-driven nail, head flush with board. The carpenter's tools love the carpenter at work. In the shade, a yellow mug full of root beer waits, slowly forms a ring of sweat on the workbench. The ice cubes melt away, ebbing as tasked. The machine needs to be tended, runs all afternoon. Salt added to sweet drone of memory. When the ice cream is ready, we may scoop it into mugs for floats. Sweetness brought to sweetness. Sip, then sneak a dribble of salt from the side of the metal churn. Root, it speaks of origins. So what questions do you have? Oh, yeah.
Throughout the book, you have the figure descriptions, and I was wondering what was the process behind that, since they're short and untitled and it's really creative.
Thank you. Well, you are not the first person to think that those are pictures. So I was telling the first group this afternoon that when I got the news that this book had won the prize, the publisher called me like in the movies and said, "Are you sitting down?" And I'm like, I was just napping, but I could stand up and sit back down if you want me to. I will do that. I still hadn't really wrapped around my head that this was a real thing. Like, I really felt like I was napping still. But anyway, he said that I had won, and he went on to talk for 5 minutes. And those first 5 minutes, I have no other memory of what he said, none. Until something struck, and he said, the only possible problem I could see would be to get the rights for all these figures that are in your book. And I'm like, the rights? But I wrote those. I owned the rights to those. And he said, well, no, the pictures. And I'm like, I made them up. They came out of my brain. There are no images to match the things that are in those figures other than possibly snapshots from my family album. But even those, what I did was, as a librarian, I thought it might be interesting to catalog memories as if I was going to place them into a collection, so that I could maybe think, okay, here is my little almanac of grief, or here's my little almanac of apples, or here's my little almanac of whatever things. So they had subject headings at first. Those fell away. Then they had appendix names specific to whatever they were, and those fell away, leaving only the figures which were collaged together. And the way that I wrote those was, little by little, I was doing abstractions on whatever memories I could think of. I had a big long list of brainstorm topics with materiality attached to them, so that if I was thinking about a boat trip, I would try to connect it to the smell of the oil, or the sounds nearby, or something very, very specific, and see if I could distill it down to the most essential part of that memory that would bring the entire thing flooding back, like unlock that memory. And so little by little, I had a gigantic compilation of those figures, but those were only the pieces. And then I started collaging them together to figure out which ones actually did belong together as a librarian. I mean, truly, I am a terrible librarian when it comes to cataloging, because I think of cataloging as a creative game, so that I might stick interesting books in mathematics sections that do not belong there, because I think it might be interesting to encounter them if I was a mathematics major. Cataloging is not a creative sport, just so you know. But for a poet, it's a really useful thing to be able to distill something down to its essential quality. That was really something that I spent a lot of time working on. Oh, and these are not all of them. First of all, some of them are assembled in one of my chapbooks, Field Guide to Alma Avenue and Fruit Drive, which is out through Essay for free. It's available online if you want to read more of these. And then there are a great number that are kind of loose, and they're published but not gathered yet. So I'm still playing with them. Now I'm kind of moved on to fairy tales. Who knows where I'm going to go next? Librarians are wily creatures, and poets too. What other questions do you have? Yeah?
So did you necessarily have trouble translating memories into words so it could be in this poem form, as compared to like a memoir that is about the memory or your past?
I'm not a long form writer. The longest poem that I wrote really is in this book, and I have not written anything longer. I write short things. The biggest problems that I have were when I would reach the end of a poem, or what I thought was the last line of a poem, and still didn't feel like I'd quite gotten to wherever was at the heart of the poem. Not necessarily that I thought it should go, but that I didn't think it was saying enough. But that's a revision problem, and certainly there are poems that didn't make it in here because they just couldn't ever reach what they were saying. And I think the best poems don't necessarily go where you, the writer, or you, the reader, think they should go, but they get at the heart of what needs to be said. So it probably was better that they didn't get in here, really. Thank you for that. That's a good question. Oh, yes. Yeah.
It's sort of in that vein. Are there poems in the book that didn't change very much, as opposed to the ones that had like 18 lives?
Yes. There are some that just kind of fell out of my brain. And actually, I consider Shipping Your Memory Home, that one, which is probably my favorite in the book. If I had to pick my favorite, that's probably my favorite. That one I wrote almost as it is, line breaks and all, which is so rare. Also, The Museum Mobile of Movable History, which I didn't read because I'm not positive it says what it needs to say yet, but it did get in there, so who knows. That one's a tricky poem, so I just let it be whatever it was. There were sort of brain teasery type poems that after I completed the exercise, I liked them the way they were, even though I felt they could have said something a little more articulate. I like the sort of mysteriousness of them. One of those is the Horsehead Nebula, which is a beautiful in-law, which only uses the letters in the words, the Horsehead Nebula, for the poem. I did cheat with one word, barely. The word barely has a Y. There's no Y in the Horsehead Nebula, except for why. Anyway, yeah, I wanted it in there, so in it went. But yet, my method for writing poems often is to kind of hew at them. Like I make a set and then I play with it and I send them out and they come back and I play with them some more. But there are a number that just are the way that they are and they never change, not for lack of attention, just because I like them the way they are. I don't know. It's a hard, you just have to be satisfied sometimes. What other questions do you have? Yes?
Describe your publication process.
Oh my goodness. So I was really lucky. Do you mean for this book? Because everything I've done has been different altogether. So about a third of this book is my thesis. So that's what I had to start with after grad school, which means, I think I had 85 poems for my thesis. There are not 85 poems in this book. As a matter of fact, really in this book, I think out of the, say, 60 poem-y looking things, I think only about 15 are from my thesis. But that's what I had to start off with. So I started sending it off as a manuscript called Variable Stars, which is what my thesis was called. And the more I got rejection, so I sent it 30 places before it got accepted, which is not a lot, but it was a lot of money as far as I was concerned. I was starting to feel kind of beaten down by the lack of cash. So I was grateful that they took it then, but it was a lot of money. But it kept coming back, and every time it would come back, I would shuffle the poems just a little bit more, and all of a sudden I started seeing that it wasn't as starry as I thought it was. So I started pulling out more and more themed poems that didn't seem to fit, and what emerged was sort of the skeleton of Alma Almanac, of this core group of poem-looking poems, because those mostly are the oldest poems in the book. And then what I filled it in with was the hybrid pieces where I thought, okay, I want to preserve some of the silences in this book. How can I maintain the silences and still create meaning between two poems that need a bridge? And so those hybrid pieces really filled the gap. But I submitted to mainly contests with judges that I admired whose work was kind of like mine, because I thought, well, I've got to be strategic about this, because submission fees for a manuscript can run anywhere from $25 to $40 per pop, per single read. And so I thought, okay, I'm only going to submit to contests because my advisor said, as a first book, someone who wants to work in academia should probably aim for a contest. So then, once I narrowed down the judges, thinking about who they were reading, what presses they were reading with, and then reading what presses they were published it with, that's where I started getting my strategy together. But I was fortunate because I only came to that moment of what presses were publishing my judge goals before I got picked up. But Elaine Equi writes hybrid material, so I kind of just had a really good feeling about her. So I was fortunate, yeah. But I mean, to be fair, I think it was Terrence Hayes who said he submitted something like 88 places before his. But everyone has different amounts of money and time, so, and it is like the lottery in a lot of respects. Right judge, right press, right time, right book in the catalog. What other questions? Oh, wait, well, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. When it came to not only writing but assembling this, did you have any overlying theme in mind for the final product?
Yeah, well, it was hard to let go of variable stars. I love the concept of a star that we think is there but is not there, or like that suddenly has a twin in the night sky. This is a real scientific thing. Like that part is real science. I really like that. So it was really hard to let that go. But once I started thinking about the non-starry poems in here, it kind of, the almanac part emerged really quickly because it was so naturey and so seasonal. So as my librarian self, I knew what that was. You know, that's the form of an almanac, is seasonal. So that was pretty simple, that part of it. Yeah.
Considering there's so many other poems that deal with travel, I'm just wondering if there was intention in the ordering of the poem.
I did want it to be kind of moving through a timeline. It was a really loose narrative because I didn't want to say, oh, my sister died here, my mother died here. You know, I didn't want it to be chronological necessarily. So I tried to make it more archetypically seasonal. I tried to really do, this is sort of a fall section, this is sort of a winter section, and kind of do it that way. I didn't always follow the rules. I just wanted each poem's bookend to talk to the poem in the middle, so that there was some sort of connective thread throughout, whether or not it stayed chronological. So hopefully poem 1 talks to poem 3 via poem 2. Yeah.
I was gonna say, like, when I didn't know that, like, the driving parts were, like, you know, bits of your life. I kind of took it as, like, this is a journey through grief, and, like, the driving was just, like, a way to kind of, you know, give, like, a tangential thing to what the process of moving through grief was. So would you say that, like, that is part imbued with, like, the traveling bits, or it's something that kind of just flowed together?
I think that I was grieving while I was driving. I think that when I was writing these poems, I was grieving. Like that this was happening, whether I wanted it to happen that way. Like I didn't set off and go, I've got 3 hours and 2 poems to write on this trip. How can I fit my, no. It's because, so in my thesis year, I lost my grandpa. And so it was really on my mind. All the losses were rippling, the rings in the water were echoing with each other, and so I was feeling all the losses all at once. And so whatever loss happened to be on my mind in that moment, that was the lost poem that got written, you know. And those they're not in chronological order in the book. So in a way, they are sort of south to north, sort of. There are a couple that are out of order, but they are sort of that way, if that makes sense. Not intentionally. That was a happy accident, but I didn't notice that recently. Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, yeah.
One more question.
Yeah.
So that non-chronological approach, do you think that relates back to the whole theme of memory throughout the book?
Yeah, partly because what I was feeling, and actually, like, I think I might have mentioned this on the podcast, is how the older you get, like, everything feels very layered. Like, you're not moving, or I am not moving through just this autumn. I'm moving through all the autumns in my memory, and a certain thing can just jump you to the next layer, whatever layer it is. And so it's not, it's just a fact of life, I think, that you live in these layers and you carry your layers with you and you kind of move up and down in the layers as your memory takes you. Yeah, it's not a rational thing, unfortunately, because some of these things I couldn't call up at will. I had to make up the extras, whatever those extras were. That's a good question. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
I know we were doing the podcast, you mentioned about not wanting to conform to cliches, especially when it came to talking about grief. And when I read this, I didn't see it so much as sad grief, more of like, not quite happy, but nostalgic reminiscing about the memories of those you lost. Was that intentional, or did that kind of just come out as you wrote it?
Oh, I love my home. I really was very homesick in a lot of when I was writing this book. So there is an aspect of nostalgia that I think it was unintentional. I think I didn't even know what I was doing when I was situating everything so deeply in my childhood home via the science. I didn't understand that was also conveying my deep love for it. So those two things kind of went hand in hand. But like I said to the earlier class, our business of the as according to Kay Ryan, the great Kay Ryan, she said that our business as poets is to rehabilitate cliches. So whether we like it or not, the things we love are the things we love. It's our business to find our way of rightly expressing them and, you know, imbibing them with our own personality so that they are not cliches. Anyone else? Or we can close and, oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Leahy.
The last question.
Yes.
So you have a bunch of writers in front of you. Some of them are poets. More of them should be poets. You mentioned in an interview, I was met with Midwestern Gothic, that you write every day, and then this afternoon you said that you actually do some kind of business of writing thing, like submitting every day. Can you talk a little bit about how you developed that habit and whether that's really true? Because I want to be able to say that, but I can't say that honestly.
Yeah, so when I was in grad school, about midway through, my thesis advisor revealed to me the horrible and terrifying statistic that when you leave grad school, many people do not return to writing, like 90%, 80%, some gigantic thing. You've spent 3 years of your life doing your passion, hopefully, only to stop doing it. And I was like, how, that is not going to be me. Like, what can I do to prevent this? So in a way to strategize, I took a creative processes class, which really led me to some scholarly work about the power of habit and building these mental connections in your mind for the things that you intend to do. So that even if you have 5 minutes to devote to something a day, 5 minutes is better than nothing, and it certainly is maintaining that mental bridge that you need to access the information. But also, so we've got the power of habit, and then I wanted to say I'm a poet, and I felt the only way that I could say I was a professional was by doing the work of poeting, not just writing, but the actual sitting down, not when inspiration struck me, but in a daily way, finding some way to honor that part of myself professionally. Because I'm privileged to have the time, and I was certainly privileged as I was a grad student to have the time to work on my own stuff. But I wanted that structure to be permanent. I want always to honor that part of myself. I don't want to get away from that part. But also I want to be seen as a professional poet. I cannot stomach the idea of being seen as a hobbyist, like as someone who doesn't take myself or my work seriously. The only way to do that is to regularly sit down with a routine and write. So I built some structures into my day, which were the 5 minutes of, 5 minutes of ukulele playing, 5 minutes of Duolingo, because I really want to learn a language and I'm committed to that, and it doesn't take long, and 5 minutes of trying to draft something. Usually something kicks in and it's way more than 5 minutes, but sometimes you don't even have 5 minutes. So I record on my phone or I jot notes on my phone, but I do have a checklist every day that says, have you done these items? Because I want to honor that part of myself, and it's really important once you are out of a structured environment to set up structures for yourself to achieve the things you need to achieve. You're not, it's magical thinking to think that you're going to be published if you don't allow time for yourself to put in the work to be published. No one is beating down anyone's door for grief poems, and I doubt that Mary Oliver even really gets regular calls about where's your new stuff. She can probably be like, I think I will draft a crane poem this morning, and a whisper on the wind goes up to Boston or something. But she's the only person that can do that. So I'm not her, I'm myself. I need to sit down and write a bunch of really bad drafts. We all know, I think oh my gosh, I can't think of her name all of a sudden. You know who I'm talking about? Yes. Thank you. I just want to make sure I could say it on tape. Shitty first drafts. The power of those is that you've got drafts. You've got something. You cannot revise blank paper. You've got to write something in order to have something to revise. So making time, as far as I'm concerned, is part of professionalism. And I also count any editing work I do for journals or things like that as POBIZ. It's on my checklist as POBIZ, poetry business stuff. But that keeps me a professional, even if I have to go out and take a job that is not being a poet. So I know that I am a poet, whether or not it's time for another book. I'm still writing every single day. So, you know, I highly recommend making time for that in your life. Make time for your dreams. They're not going to magically come knocking. You have to go get them.
Well, that's a great way to end.
Yeah.
Say
Yeah.
that again. Make time for your dreams.
Make time for your dreams because they're not going to magically come knocking. They're not. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.